drones. Everything we did, in that vein and with conservation was like, what can producers adopt this season or next season that if it doesn't make them money, at least makes their life better? Because of course, with precision ag and drones, especially, like, we don't know how you make money with them, but we know that they're fun and cool and do provide a level of convenience. If you can monetize that, go for it.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast Show. My name is Brian Ernell, and I'm coming to you from Oklahoma State University. This show is brought to you on behalf of Wyzenetics. Today, I'm happy to have our guest as Dr. Joby Czarnecki. She is the Associate Research Professor of Precision Agriculture at Mississippi State University. Joby is with the Geosystems Research Institute with faculty home in the Department of Plant and Soil Sciences. Her research focus is precision ag and applied use of unmanned aircraft systems. Prior to this position, Joby was with REACH program at MSU, where her research focused primarily on tailwater recovery systems. Dr. Czarnecki was additionally employed by Northern Gulf Institute Geosystems Research Institute as a research associate and with the Delta State University as an instructor of GIS. Joby, we've interacted over the years quite a bit. I am so happy to have you on as a guest. I always look forward to, interviewing my friends. So thanks for coming on today.
Well, thanks for having me. You may or may not know that Oklahoma State is my BS and MS alma mater. So It's always exciting to have that connection back to Stillwater because, I guess it is true what they say, college is the best and worst years of your life. And so I spent those not that far from where you're sitting, Brian. But thank you for having me.
So true. So let's tell the crowd, I gave you the bio, which I always love reading, but, tell our audience a little bit about how you ended up where you're at Mississippi. I mean, the diverse background, you go from tailwater to aerial systems. They're not, necessarily perfectly paired, but there are some reasons.
Well, it's actually, as you were reading that, I was like, gosh, if I really done all that, I just can't believe it's been that long. So yeah. I actually started out in psychology at Oklahoma State. So yeah, if you want to just really drag it out to like the diverse background. And the irony of that is after 2 years, I left that sort of humanities, social science vein to move into agriculture because I thought, gosh, if I want to do this professionally, I'm going to be in school for the rest of my life. And the joke's on me because I was actually in school even longer than I would have been if I had just become like a fancy PhD psychologist. So I started out in psychology, but I am from rural Oklahoma. I guess most of our listeners that at least are Oklahoma State fans probably are familiar with Alva or Enid. So I'm from Northwest Oklahoma, out where the good pheasant hunting is. And I'm in a rural community, there's agriculture. And when I realized that psychology wasn't going to be a life plan for me, I had worked at the co-op and I had gotten very interested in GIS, which is geographic information systems, computer mapping. And at the time, precision agriculture was just taking off. Of course, everyone in precision agriculture knows the legend that is Bill Ron and John Soley and Marv Stone. They were all faculty members when I was an undergrad. They just started Team VRT. So it was a really exciting time to get into precision agriculture, even though I would say most of the farmers that we were interacting with, they were like, we don't have any old monitors. And I'm like, no, I'm saying yield monitor. And, so it was exciting to move to Mississippi in that technology had gotten a little farther because more people sort of owned their own equipment, which in Oklahoma, because we use custom cutters, like people didn't have all that stuff. And here they were sort of tipping their toe into it. So I came here to Delta State. They needed someone to teach GIS and also work for an ag company. And so it was a great fit for that. But after 2 years, the gentleman who is our current provost at Mississippi State, who has also been VP of research and was director of the institute I work for now, was also Dr. Tom Pieper's best grad student, he told me. And so he encouraged me highly. And I was like, I'm second best, right? Like he had no comments about that. Yeah. But, he said, well, you need to go work for David. like go work for David. And so after 2 years of teaching GIS at Delta State, I said, okay, let's do it. And so David was really gracious to hire me. And now 20 years later, I'm still at Mississippi State.
Yeah.
But because of funding, when you're on soft money at a university, you get moved around from project to project. But, everything I've done sort of lends itself to conservation, use of geospatial technologies. So while it might seem like, gosh, she does a lot of stuff, at the end of the day, I've always really worked on water conservation, soil conservation, how geospatial technologies help us make better decisions. And, I guess that's going to, one day you wake up and realize, well, I guess that's my career. And so here we are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not much different, right? And so, we haven't talked about this really, but I love the conversation of how you ended up. So I was non-rural. I was rural, but not farming background, right? And so I was in FFA, and I was horrible with animals. So I didn't do livestock judging. I did land judging because I was not good with animals, and found kind of a niche there. Wanted to go to a JUCO because my mom worked there and it's free tuition, and I was not going to be an animal scientist. And I did not like kids. I wasn't going to be an ag teacher. And so that really limited what to go in an ag field. And so there was this thing called agronomy. He's like, sure, whatever. I'll do that. And I'll go to OSU. And, I'm about like you. I'm 20 years in on the job almost, thinking, how did I end up here? I would have never thought I didn't know what soil scientist was when I was in high school. So our tracks are interesting. So moving forward now.
I will tell you how I ended up in soil science, because your department offers a lot of flavors of plant and soil science. And it just so happened that the day I was like, you know what, I'm going to do that. It was the summer, which means there's nobody, right? Everybody's field work. So I wandered in and I said, I'd like to change to this department. And so they looked around to see who could talk to me. And the only person available was Jeff Hattie. And he had all the degree sheets laid out. And he's like, well, you could do this, you could do this. But the soil science one kept creeping closer and closer and closer to my person. And so in the end, I was like, well, I guess I'll take this one. So it's actually just kind of a thing that I even ended up in soil science. And, I ended up in weed science for a master's degree because, Tom Pieper will tell you he doesn't look for grad students. He's like, they always just find me.
Yep.
And my theory is that professors are a bit like carnies. I don't know if that's politically correct now.
I love where you're going on this. I can't wait.
They have this game that you think you can win. They're like, shoot the ball, win the bunny. And you're like, I could do that. And it's only until you've spent your last dollar that you realize the ball doesn't even fit through the hoop. But by then you're a year into grad school and you're like, might as well finish.
I'm going to use this so much, Joby. This is oh my, because you're describing my master's with Bill Ron, because Bill was mine, of course, and John Soule and Marv Stone were on my committee. So yeah, that sounds very much like it. That's hilarious.
Well, I mean, it's true. Now that now that I live on this side of it, it's kind of funny because they say things like you pick up your advisor's worst habits. If you had seen my office an hour ago, you'd been like, God, that looks like Tom Pieper's office, because he had stacks of paper on everything. And I was like, how does this happen? And I know now because someone comes in your office and you're like, oh, let me clean that up. And you kind of put it over here. And then after a 30, 40 year career, it's everywhere. And they also say things like, well, I was the worst student worker in the world. I know that. And now I'm paying for that. I've got my comeuppance on being the worst student worker in the world. And also like my bad habits as a grad student, my students have those. And so I guess it's true. Yeah. Who knew?
You'd appreciate this. So I've been in this office since 2008. We're moving to New Ag Hall this July.
So
and they're giving everybody 5 little boxes that they can move from 1 foot by 2 foot by 18 inches is what they're going to move for us as 5 boxes. I'm like, yeah, right.
You can't even put your name tags in those 5 boxes from every conference you went to.
Yeah. I had to get rid of those just last week. So anyways, moving on.
Yeah, I digress.
No, this is fantastic. So tell us about what you're doing. What is your program doing? What are some of the either recently past projects or things you're excited about moving into?
Well, lately we do. Well, so I say lately is in the last 7 years, which just seems like it's been a year. Because I've worked with Reach prior to coming to this position, we always had a very strong focus on producer-driven research that could be adopted in a short time horizon. So even the stuff that I've done with UAVs, which let's be honest, let's just call them drones. It's not necessarily what the university wants us to call them, and nobody knows what UAVs are. No. So drones, everything we did, in that vein and with conservation was like, what can producers adopt this season or next season that if it doesn't make them money, at least makes their life better? Because of course, with precision ag and drones, especially, like, we don't know how you make money with them, but we know that they're fun and cool and do provide a level of convenience. If you can monetize that, go for it. So lately we've been focusing a lot though on how to help producers become more, and I hate to say autonomous because that has other connotations. Like, we're not trying to turn producers into robots. I promise. It's more like, how can we help them help us? Because I think everyone who worked in precision ag and also conservation, we always ask producers, like, okay, can we get your field data? Like, we need your field data. We need your yield. We need your soil tests. We need, what'd you apply? What'd you plant? And it's not their fault, but they give us kind of a hot mess of stuff. And then
that's a very nice way to put it.
Well, we do what we can with it. And then we give them a very unsatisfying answer of like, well, there just wasn't much I could do, which I think creates this unfortunate circle of, this researcher asked me for a bunch of stuff I don't have time to give them. So I give them some stuff and then they tell me, well, I don't know, I can't help you. I need more data. And so the incentive is like not there. Like, what did I get for giving you my data? And I appreciate that. So what I'm saying is, like, let's try to meet in the middle on this. If I can get you to do like 10% more data quality, I can probably give you a slightly better answer. And then we create a positive feedback loop instead of this kind of broken, sort of busted loop that we have now. So everything we're doing is really about field scale, producer driven, try to get an answer that actually is useful. But we're still falling down on some of those. So all of our conservation work with cover crops, which is what we've focused on, I would say, for the last 7 years, we've done it at field scale. And that's taught us, I think, much like with the drones, when we went from small plots to field scale, we learned a lot. Because if you're trying to do something in a 10 by 40 strip of land, there are very different consequences than if you're on even 20 acres. And so we appreciate that the stuff we do on small plots, while it builds foundational knowledge, is not going to be readily adoptable, just logistic wise. A producer that collaborates on your research is happy to hoe maybe 1 acre of weeds. He's probably not happy to then take that management practice across his entire farm, because the graduate student's research showed that you could save $2 an acre. So it's kind of like, okay, so we've looked at like what would be an immediate, all that long drawn out, blah, blah, to say, we have looked at like what would be immediately useful, but also fits into our current production systems, and, adopt conservation to the extent that you can remain profitable and not hate your life.
So what are some of those, let's say, what are some of the low hanging fruits that you've come across?
Well, one of the things we did early on with the drones, interestingly, everybody was, like, okay, what do you do with it? And we would go to meetings. I'm 100% research. And at the same time they hired me, they hired a 100% extension person. And so together we were supposed to go, do this thing. And so we go to meetings, and the only thing producers could ask us was like, what do I do with it and how will it make me money? And we honestly didn't know. So we were trying to figure out, well, what could you do? And one of the things we figured out really easily is that it's hard to necessarily, this is going to not make sense. It makes sense, but you're like, well, that's not technically correct. We talked to a gentleman who's a farmer who was also at the time chair of the soybean promotion board. And he said, I love it for a lot of things that are not its spectral properties.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay. And he basically means he uses a video feed. He didn't care about NDVI or classified maps, or he just likes the video feed because it saves him a ton of time. And we started to think about that, and we thought, well, okay, it doesn't require you to learn how to read. Things I've only recently come to appreciate. It's not highly discriminatory because it's a red to green scale, which doesn't work for people with color blindness. It's basically what you see. And so we started trying to video scout with the just video feed off of a cheap $500 Phantom. And we just determined that had a lot of advantages, right? You don't have to go into a muddy field. We showed up one time right after the crop duster left. And nope, like I was a weed scientist. I don't want to walk into a field with no PPE, especially if I don't know what they just sprayed. And so, and we've gone out there after the rain, the road is all mudded out. And you're like, no, I'm not taking my truck down that. So it was actually really nice to just be able to fly over and look. And, you can get down low enough and the video feed is really high quality. And so we started this idea of like, okay, let's just see, like, what do you do with the video feed? And we tried to launch an extension program about that. The problem we ran into at the time, though, and it would, I'm sure, still be an issue, is with the FAA requirements. Farmers were not comfortable talking to us that were using it that didn't have the appropriate paperwork. So that idea crashed and failed. But it was kind of the idea of like, you don't have to adopt all of this at once.
Nope.
Like
Yep.
tiptoe in, if you understand video, and I think all of us understand video, and I'm telling you, the consultants we worked with and the farmers we worked with could look at that video and they could tell us everything they saw. Way better than Lewis and I, because we don't have any field history knowledge. So trying to think about like, what's a way to just ease your way into it. I think we oversell the ideas and we also make it seem like you got to buy the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it's not even academia. If you look at, especially in that marketplace, if we looked at, let's say 2010 to 2014, the marketplace of the drone was all about mapping. It still is heavily planned. In reality, it was, give me a Mavic. I want to get up 400 foot. I want to look over a quarter section, know exactly where I need to go to sample for aphids or for weeds. And I can be more efficient on my ATV after I send that bird up in the air, especially if I've got sloping land or something that hides. And you're right. It was just that bird's eye view for somebody knowledgeable of the field, or even on the cattle side. We got folks that use it to check water tanks or ponds to see if they have to haul water in the southwest part of the state.
We check a lot of irrigation. They check irrigation here because if it's not working, they can fly out there and look and see what's wrong and then know what to lug out through a pretty tall cornfield in the middle of July.
And one of the fun things now, it takes a better camera that we're using a lot now in our region, is we have a lot of prescribed fires. So, not just prescribed, I should say.
You have a lot of fire, period. Also. I don't know that some of that is prescribed.
Yeah. So on the wildfire side, we have a lot more of our rural fire departments utilizing drones with a thermal so they can watch hotspots. They can do mop up with it, especially in canyon country. If you move west of your home area, you get all that canyon, and it's much more effective, and it saves equipment costs and fuel costs. But we're talking, a Mavic with the thermal on it that you can now get fairly cheap.
Yeah.
We're going to
it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think it's the same. We've taken the same approach with conservation adoption. It's like, don't go out and put cover crops on every acre you own until you learn how to manage it on your system. Because I know in our own research at the field scale, we definitely cost people money. It turns out it's not free to collaborate with researchers on research, especially when we hurt your yield. But, it's a thing of like, you got to learn how to incorporate. You've worked years to optimize a system in a certain way. And now a researcher's telling you, let's make this tiny change. But that tiny change is so interconnected that, it takes time. It's very adaptive management. So it's the same with all the technology. I mean, the conservation is the same kind of approach, like start low and cheap and figure it out.
So we're with Dr. Joby Czarnecki. She's with the Mississippi State University as associate research professor. Joby, let's talk a little bit about the conservation work that you've been doing and some of the practices. I love where you're going with that conversation, because there's a tendency to think that one size fits all, or it feels like to me that it's presented as maybe a one size fits all, when, to say that what works in Mississippi works in Enid or in Western Oklahoma is probably not right. But you're right. What works on the field south of the home place may not work to the field north of the home place. So can you talk a little bit about what you're doing?
Oh, one of the reasons we started most of our cover crop research, especially, was that all of the literature available to farmers and research results is primarily out of the Midwest. Those are very different systems, and like the weather is also really different, which is going to impact your ability to build up organic matter, for instance. And so we wanted our producers to have local I say local information, but especially in our Delta region, which is our alluvial plain along the Mississippi River, the soils are, we were out there yesterday, and like one side of the road is like a sandbox and the other side of the road is a very heavy clay. And you think, like, how does this happen? And if you own that entire section, well, guess what? You're farming in two very different soil types. And so it's one of those things of like, it's got to work for this particular field, and just those lessons from the one field, maybe they translate to the field across the road, maybe they don't, which is another reason we need a variety of, like every kind of ag research, you need a variety of environments to test, especially new practices, and see like what's the best fit, which is I think one of the more exciting things that machine learning and AI can bring us is like being able to do what we would call like systems modeling and those kind of approaches to get at more sort of robust solutions, to know how it's going to interact in this environment versus this one, unless you have this other thing. But we just can't. One of the reasons I like, I'm hopeful that we can improve sort of the farmers' interest in quality data and also their own interest in on-farm experimentation and, collaborating with us, is getting more of that data. We don't have the advantages, I would say, ag companies have, where they have end user license agreements that allow them to sort of harvest data from producers. Universities don't offer those, right?
No.
We can barely offer cheese balls and free sweaters and Yetis. So it's one of those things like, how are we going to get this data? Well, if I can't get the data, at least maybe I can give producers tools to collectivize, to get those answers on their own, and to understand like the statistical significance is there, not just, well, I picked my worst field and I put cover crops on it and boy, they sucked. And so I will never use them again. Like being more strategic about the use and the placement and appreciating the nuance of the results.
And so I want to jump back on a few nuances just to share with the audience. One, your mention of cheese balls goes back to the Mississippi State Dairy. By the way, go down to Mississippi State, have the cheese balls, have the ice cream.
I will point out the ice cream cups have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller.
I've noticed.
It's like when I first came here, you had to bring your whole family to eat one cup of ice cream, and it was like just forever. And now it's like 2 bites with this horrible wooden spoon and it's done. Like, what is this?
I love the breaks when I come down there. But I'm going to go back especially for any of the audience that's not familiar with, say, the Delta, really anywhere, is the alluvial nature of the soils from Mississippi all the way through Alabama. Is that I've been on many fields myself where you mentioned you have a sand to the north of the field and a clay. But because of the alluvial nature of these fields, you can go from a 20-foot deep sugar sand to a gumbo in a matter of 30 feet, and then go back to a silt loam, hit a gumbo, hit a sand, these veinal looks. And so what I was going to get to is, as the audience, go to Google Earth and look into the Mississippi Delta, basically all the deltas, you find this alluvial pattern. And I take my precision ag class to Google Earth, and we spend a full lecture of just looking through Google Earth at different parts of the U.S. to see the Delta, to see those alluvial trends, go up to north where you have the glacial soils that you can just see on Google Earth. And understanding the variability of your Delta is unlike what you find almost anywhere else, because you have that nature just so drastic.
It's definitely, they can get Sergo maps, but I'm still not convinced they're of any use. I know we talk about zone management a lot, and it's kind of like, well, how many zones is appropriate?
How big are the zones?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the practices that you're seeing implemented down in the Delta that have been successful for you and your clientele?
Well, I used to work a lot with water, for sure. And so I was focused more on the water quantity side. We had a lot of adoption oh gosh, probably 10 years ago of tailwater recovery systems, which is what I used to work on, which the simplest way, if you don't know what those are, think about it like a rain barrel for your farm. And Mississippi's Delta region irrigates out of its alluvial aquifer, like every aquifer in the world. We are overpumping it. And our reach, despite the fact that, when I came here from Oklahoma, I was shocked at how much rain. I was like, how would you ever use so much rain? Because it's more than twice what Oklahoma, well, at least Northwest Oklahoma gets, but it doesn't necessarily come at the right time. So we're still irrigating because the summer is the dry season, winter is the rainy season. But we had really good adoption of that, and at the same time, they hired Dr. Jason Kreutz, and he had a wildly successful irrigation efficiency extension program. Because if you don't know anything about the Delta, you probably don't appreciate most of our irrigation is furrow irrigation. Mm-hmm. So digging trenches, we bed up, and we water down these trenches, but that can be very inefficient. And so he did a really nice program. They got really good adoption of more water saving practices on that, which at the time, that was a good sort of thing that came out of that. Now that we've sort of still looking at water, but now we're also thinking about the quality, because interestingly, the programs that funded a lot of those water quantity saving tailwater recoveries were actually targeted at nutrient reduction. The idea being that you're capturing the water, it doesn't leave the field, so those nutrients are also not flowing out of the field. And so a lot of that was what we call edge of field practice. So, drainage ditches and capturing the water as it's leaving. And then we had to start focusing on, okay, we've got this sort of what's leaving managed. Let's focus on what we can do in the field to sort of back up closer to the source of the issues. So, we've got a lot of interesting cover crops. I will say, just my opinion, I think and I'm not blaming anybody for this, I think a lot of the mindset about cover crops is not so much environmentally focused as the other, maybe more tangible benefits, because we still don't know how to quantify ecosystem service. But what we do know how to quantify is weed suppression, reduced herbicide application, especially for some of our more problematic herbicide resistant weeds. So I think we've gotten a lot of, I think we get more traction on the idea of the cover crops as a weed management tool. And so the interest, I would say, in cover crops is up and down. Some people love it and they've got really great results. I think they found how to make that work in their system. Some people don't. One of the other issues we have here is because of the furrow irrigation, we'll never be able to completely get off tillage, because we have to drag middles to get the water to flow. So we can't just go to no-till. Also, our weed problems won't allow that. And so it's not just one day everybody in Mississippi is going to wake up and be like, well, cover crops is the answer, because it's just not quite. I mean, I'm probably not allowed to say that, but it's not the answer for everybody right now. And it may never be the answer for some people.
Yeah. And so that I was actually, you've already led to the path that I wanted to get to, is that,
you're welcome.
I've had the pleasure, the opportunity to work with a lot of folks from Mississippi State, either whether they're still there or gone. So I've gotten more familiar with Mississippi than probably many of the other Southeast states. That whole bedding system, it creates challenges if we look at no-till, if we look at cover crops, and also the termination of that so that you can dry out the soil. Because you have problems like, okay, so when do we terminate? If we wait too late to terminate, maybe we aren't getting the soil dry enough to get the planters in. There's a whole interaction of your seasonality of moisture, your management of the beds, which is, we have parts of Oklahoma that no longer use furrow, but we still bed our cotton, which is, to me, just, we're doing it because we do it for no other reason. But kind of talk about that challenges of trying to do conservation. You're talking about water quality, and yet the environment and the historic management almost go against the entire framework that has been laid before you to what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I will say, though, that the termination, like everything else, it's a learning curve. And so they're on, I think 6 weeks is what they're recommending now. I know there's been a lot of concern early on about the Green Bridge, because it's just warm here, as I haven't lived in Oklahoma for some time, and I'm telling you, I am too soft to move back to Oklahoma at this point because I like it. You kind of complain about it, but air conditioner at Thanksgiving is a thing here, and shorts on Christmas is a thing here, and I'm not complaining about that. In July, catch me in July, but it's just warm here. It's warm and wet. Sometimes it's just we'll have a late freeze, and sometimes it just goes for it. You never really know, but people were concerned about that. So eventually they settled on, I think, about 6 weeks. And even us, when we started, these are some of the lessons we learned early on with the cover crops when we went to the field scale. We had the rye matting down and kept the soil cooler. We got slugs. We didn't expect slugs because we didn't know what to expect. We also learned our lessons about row cleaners and not dragging a bunch of trash into the corn furrow we planted. And so, like every farmer, we had to learn from our mistakes, I guess. Hopefully, our mistakes will keep them from making the same mistakes. And so, 6 weeks is what they've decided on is time to get the stuff down. It actually folds in nicely too. We do a burn down application here before planting. So, one of the ways to sort of reduce your cost of adopting cover crops is if you make termination your burn down, your pre-plant burn down, then you cut that price out of the chemical termination and the burn down are the same.
Makes perfect sense. Are you seeing much adoption? So you mentioned the chemical burn down. Is there a lot in the region of the crimping and roller, or
my impression? This is just my impression. I don't as a 100% research appointment. I don't necessarily get to go hang out with farmers a lot, so my information is maybe secondhand sometimes, but my impression is that because it folds into the burn down, it's just easy. I do know a few people with roller crimpers, but the one person who we know got slugs was using roller crimper to knock down. To be fair, though, he was knocking down like 5-6 foot tall rye, and then on the back planting.
Right, yeah.
But he is one of those people who has found his groove and just as completely making this work for his system and loves it. He's texting us photos of his improved water quality. And so he was willing to take that risk. Not every, especially in Oklahoma, you would never want 6 foot tall rye and then try to plant a crop into it.
When those recs first came down, the recommendation for termination of rye was during anthesis, and escapes happened.
Oh yeah. I'm sure.
And having rye escapes in a wheat dominated system is not necessarily what we want a lot of. And so that quickly we were able to get the NRCS to move some of those recommendations further away from anthesis.
I can see that.
It doesn't take too many rye escapes to be seen in a wheat field.
Well, when I first came here, Jack Varco, who I'm sure you probably know, he's since retired, but he was the soil fertility person here. And his sort of thing about rye was how much nitrogen is it going to take up the longer you let it go? And that's, I think, obviously a concern. I understand Oklahoma, it's also taking up water, which is something we can maybe deal with, but in Oklahoma, probably not. So unless you get those timely rains, which you never know.
It's time for our famous three. Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
Well, Joby, we're hitting the end of our time, so I'm going to hit you with our three questions that I would do with all the guests. First, what is your go-to work resource?
Well, I sort of felt like it's not very science of me to be I go to Google Scholar, but it turns out everybody else on the show answered that. Maybe sponsor us, Google. No, it is. I mean, it is nice because I guess I've been around long enough. I know a lot of the names of the people who publish. So especially with the Google profile, can hit that and see all the pubs and see okay, what's Brian got going on? I need some fertility work. So that's nice. But, of course, you can also randomly search for topics, but I've found sometimes going to people who I would perceive as leaders in the field and just sort of mining their publication record, it's pretty quick.
Nope. Awesome. Next up, what is your favorite leisurely activity? What do you do in your free time, Joe? Because you have a ton of it, I know.
Well, actually, as a late career, actually, I have no kids, so I have actually more leisure time than a lot of people. But I'm over 40 now. Probably could have guessed that. I really got into birding in a hard way. And I saw a meme that said, like, binge watching at over 40 is like 4 bird feeders in your yard. And I'm up to 5. It turns out that it's a nice, when I was, a child, I couldn't get up before noon in the summer, but which is funny because as an adult, I can't sleep past, say, 5 a.m. But it's just a nice way to start your day, like appreciating nature and thinking like, this is why we're forcing conservation on people, is so that we can continue to go out and see birds and enjoy water resources.
What's the most unique bird you've seen in your backyard? Anything that's just, oh, wow.
Well, so recently, I don't know if you've ever, the thing is, I didn't care about birds or trees or any of this when I lived in Oklahoma. So I literally don't know what Oklahoma has anymore.
You weren't from an area with trees. So, that's true. What it goes back to.
We had Eastern red cedar. Start with me about my lack of trees, and you got your one tree line to protect your home from the sand scour.
True.
Do you have cedar waxwings in Oklahoma?
Yes.
They are, they're not necessarily rare, but like they are so, like, you just feel like you could just pet them and they would be so silky. And the fact that they move in this like horde where it's just like all of a sudden like there's like into your tree, and then we have a magnolia tree in our backyard next to our feeder. And they will be in there and you can't even see them because they blend in so well. And I know they are talking, and I just know they're communicating, and I'll go out there and not be aware, and they will not move at all until I turn and then the tree will just explode as they all leave at once. And so I guess lately because it's the season, I'm crushing on cedar waxwings in my backyard.
My folks usually give it, because it's not every year, but we have they have sometimes a pair of orioles that come in, and that's their when they come in, we get informed.
My aunt and lives in Cherokee up there. She puts out the grape. She's like, you got to get the Sam's Club grape jelly. That's the one they like, and she's stuffing bowls full, and the orioles are just all over it.
Oh, fantastic. Finally, where do people, if somebody wants to know more about your program and what you're doing, where do they go to find out information about that?
I have a faculty research page. And so they have all those academic like social medias now. And I just don't, despite my abundant free time to apparently just stare at birds out of my window, I don't seem to be able to find the time to keep up with LinkedIn, ResearchGate, all those. So my faculty page, though, is always up to date with our most current projects. We're working on getting old projects kind of more robustly filled out. That's a new thing MSU rolled out. And so I'm sure you can link that in the show notes, because it's kind of a weird cryptic whatever, but it's faculty.msstate.edu/J as in Joby, P for Prince, which was my maiden name, which was way easier to spell than Czarnecki. And I joke that I'm the Joby formerly known as Prince. Which is only going to appeal to people in Brian and I's age range. So JP228. So I know, right? Well, these are the cryptic net IDs we get. So faculty.msstate.edu/JP228/research, which is why maybe it's just better if you check the show notes.
I love it. Well, Joby, thank you so much. I've had so much fun. Again, this is Dr. Joby Czarnecki, Associate Research Professor, Precision Agriculture, Mississippi State University. Y'all, if you have enjoyed this conversation, hit the subscribe button, share with your friends, or even those that you aren't that friendly with, but let us get some more followers. If you've liked what you've seen, or if you have ideas for other guests that we need on our show, leave a comment and let us know what you think. Joby, so much for spending the time with us today.
Thanks, Brian.